I started thinking about the ways in which I identify with Dorothy in Kansas. How many conflicts were had because I didn't know how to use my words? In one of my episodes, I talk about the trauma associated with being interrupted or simply not allowed to speak for much of my life. But what if, like Dorothy, I just didn't know how to use my words? Like maybe ever? Whether as immaturity, a learned behavior stemming from upbringing, relationship structures, traditional classroom techniques, from fear, or even imposter syndrome, some of us were clearly not given the tools we needed to communicate effectively. Or maybe we were given the tools without the instructions. I don't know. But also, some of us get easily overwhelmed by the voices in the room that don't recognize boundaries or have an apparent social awareness about when not to talk, but rather to just listen. And then there's some of us who feel the room way too hard from the get go and become too intimidated by all the feels to speak clearly and with intention. I can raise my hand to most of these limitations, sadly. My adaptive mechanism was not to speak, not to put myself out there. No one probably noticed. They were all busy conversing. But isn't that what I was taught? Raise your hand, please. Wrong answer. Class, can you tell me the right answer? And humiliation ensues. It's no wonder I tend to be reactive when feeling I am not being listened to or heard. It's also no wonder I often circular talk when I do finally get the chance to say what I want to. It's like I lose all focus on speaking as my attention turns to the fact that someone is actually listening. Then words flow out of my mouth that make no sense and can't land anywhere. I've done that so many times, it's embarrassing. It is clear that conversing doesn't come second nature to all of us. This is illustrated by our divisions and ruffled feathers in this day and age. Don't you agree? To address this, I do see that modern conversational etiquette has changed. Not in a good way, though, in my humble opinion. A lot of focus has landed on not interrupting, but conversing used to mean a back and forth. Interrupters ruin that, though. They more often than not end up taking the convo somewhere else completely. So now we have given way to the notion that only one person speaks until finished. Folks, that is not a conversation. That is an oratory, a demand to have the floor for however long the speaker can linger through his or her message. I don't know how many of you have experienced this other side of the coin. But wait, as I write this, I'm having an epiphany. Both sides of the coin bring us back to the person that can't stop talking. It never was about interrupting. It was always about their need to be heard also. Mind blown. But in this space is where true conversation and connection dies. We are all just wanting to be heard. There's nothing better than being in a group of people having a conversation that everyone is excited about, but respectful of each other's voice. And we shouldn't have to be drinking or smoking to be able to do this in a way that feels natural. Seriously, in our new quantum awareness phase, can't we do better? Forget conversational Spanish. Can we incorporate conversational English into our curriculum and throw in tolerance as part of the lesson? I digress. But seriously, maybe add memory techniques too, since a lot of the time people interrupt because they say they are afraid they will forget. Y'all, we need this so bad. These days I'm better, but I'm 63 I do still have to put a lot of focus and intention into what I'm going to say almost every time I speak, to be honest, but I'm better at slowing down and taking my time. However, the lasting impression of unworthiness remains something I continue to work on because now I actually have a message that I desperately want to share. And like most things that are hard to hear, it will likely land on many a deaf ear. That rejection has more to do with the listener, though, than it has to do with me or the message. But I think that was the lesson all along. Thanks for listening. Ciao.
Hi, I just wanted to take a minute and clarify some things about this video. First of all, I'm pretty sure some of you that have known me for a long time are thinking to yourself, that's not the Julie I know. But I will argue that many, if not all of us, have our own inner voice that we don't show the world. Well, I wanted you to know that there are those of us who on one side of the conversation are struggling with feeling heard, and the way they deal with it is by not speaking up. I think because of it, I've become a really good listener, and a lot of people say that I'm a really good listener, but that was at the expense of not having a voice in certain conversations. And this is just like a overall lifetime sort of vibe. Maybe I spoke up at times when I thought it was really important, but I think probably what happened was I didn't speak up when it was really important because it felt contentious or something like that. And I did speak up when it wasn't really that meaningful, perhaps. I don't know. I'm second guessing myself, but the reason why I think it's important, though, is because I do think a lack of communication skills is a cause for some of the division we have in our society today. We were brought up in an environment where children really weren't allowed to speak freely. At least for me, I'm 63. So I was, developing my earliest communication skills in the 60s and early 70s. And it was much more of a hierarchical family system back then. I, for one, am really glad to see that's changing and has changed a lot. I see my own children allowing their kids the opportunity to express themselves. And I'm not putting blame really on my parents, grandparents, etc. That in the context of the time, that was what was expected. And I imagine that even my parents saw their parenting techniques to be a lot more lenient than their parents, and I'm sure they were. But the end result for people my age could be that they haven't developed the skills necessary to be able to communicate their thoughts and their feelings in a way that doesn't come across abrupt. A lot of times when I do speak, I feel like I come across gruff. And that's because in a conversation when I'm talking with someone about something that's difficult, I have a hard time using my words, using my words correctly anyway. I avoid conflict at all costs. And that's another part of it. But is that my personality or is that how I was raised? Maybe it's both. And then when you get into thinking about classroom structure when you're a child, back when I was in elementary school, it was definitely a competitive environment. And I know it's still competitive, but I don't know. I sort of feel like when a teacher says, raise your hand, and a child is brave enough to stick their hand up and want to answer the question, even if they're wrong, there's an opportunity there for expansion with that child instead of asking for someone else to get it correct. And maybe classrooms are already different in that way. I want to believe they are. Who would I be today? How would I be different if I had been given more opportunities to speak? But aside from that, we have the other people on the other side of the equation who are very confident with their speaking and their communication and conversing skills. And those of us on this side of it are easily overwhelmed by that. So it's much easier to just become a good listener than it is a good speaker. But in going back to comparing myself with Dorothy, I really feel myself in that little meme I posted in the very beginning, sort of like in those moments of the most emotions. That is when I have the hardest time actually saying what I need to say. And I always have gotten that feeling from Dorothy as well. So she imprisons herself in that little world of, I don't want to call it miscommunication. She's really not speaking up. She's not really saying what, how she feels. It's all emotional. And I totally get that. But again, back in those times, I'm sure children weren't given those tools to be able to speak their minds clearly. And those that could really, really got ahead fast. So anyway, I just felt like I needed to clarify a little bit. I love you all. And yes, this YouTuber struggles through some of those issues, but this is also therapy for me. I don't often go off script, and when I do, it's at the very end, and I'm hoping that the people that are really grabbing on to what I'm sharing in my episodes stick around long enough to see these candid outros, I guess you could say, because this is where some of the meat is. But again, thank you for being here. I wouldn't be doing this without your feedback and support, and I really, really appreciate you. And I hope I'm providing some valuable content and food for thought. So anyway, love you guys. I'm out. Bye.